Good day, and welcome to this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. My name is Ann Robinson, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Kinaxis. My guest today is Professor Mohan Sodhi, Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at the Bayes Business School, City University of London. Mohan and his colleagues recently published a fascinating paper on why emerging supply chain technologies initially disappoint: blockchain, IoT, and AI. Mohan, welcome.
Thank you, Anne.
Now, can you start by just giving us a little bit more about yourself? I know you've held many seats in the supply chain space, vendor, consultant, practitioner, and academic for a long time, and maybe a little bit about what motivated you to do this research study and some of the pertinent details about it.
Yes, I've worked as a consultant. I've done implementations of technology, and last 20 years, I've been a full-time academic. This particular project came simply not because of any big ideas. It was simply trying to understand what practitioners are expecting from these new technologies. So it was meant to be quite a simple project where we asked practitioners, mid to senior level supply chain managers, as to what they are expecting from AI, what they're expecting from IoT and blockchain in their supply chains. So we asked people if they knew those technologies, if they were already doing some work with those technologies in their supply chains. And then we would ask them questions about their organization goals, the expected benefits, and what kind of constraints they might face. And we expected, okay, maybe the constraints might be similar, like project management and all that, but obviously what they expect from different technologies would be quite different. And we would highlight that people expect this from blockchain and this from IoT and something else from AI in their supply chains. And we would report on it. So it was meant to be a fairly straightforward article about what to expect from supply chain technologies, or what practitioners who are already experimenting with those technologies expecting from these technologies. So that was meant to be the start. What was surprising was that if I pulled together all the practitioners' responses, then the three technologies were indistinguishable. And we've talked about this. It was just asking people, householders, about refrigerators, microwaves, and vacuum cleaners. And people said, oh, we expect the same thing from all those three things. So you know something is a bit off. And these are people who are currently experiencing those technologies, but their prioritization of the different expected benefits called affordances in the paper, or organization goals or constraints, are the same, no matter vacuum cleaner, refrigerator, microwave, same. So that was the surprising, and then I knew back from my consulting days, obviously we knew about the hype cycle, and I guess I've been on both sides of that as well. So it was curious that if people are not really distinguishing, these are people who are currently experimenting with those technologies in their supply chain. If they can't distinguish between a refrigerator, microwave, and a vacuum cleaner, that maybe that might be the reason why there are inflated expectations to begin with, and then the trough of disillusionment, because refrigerators don't do floor cleaning very well and microwaves don't cool food very well. But after a while, after people start sharing experiences, then the slow rise of enlightenment begins as people start saying, okay, maybe refrigerators are better for cooling and microwaves are better for warming up food, and vacuum cleaners can do the cleaning.
Yeah, it's probably worth telling our audience you chose these three technologies based on the Gartner hype cycle, and we're all us supply chain practitioners are very familiar with that. As a technology goes through that path, it goes through this peak of inflated expectations before landing in the trough of disillusionment, which is where all three of these technologies were when you started this research project. Maybe could you take a minute?
I'll interrupt you there for a second. Those three technologies were chosen simply because they were amongst the top three in technology supply chain managers are currently looking at. I've seen that list Can't remember offhand. So out of these technologies, these were sort of the leading technologies, meaning that people already had experience with these. So these were not totally fresh off the shelf, so to speak. These were technologies people had already been experiencing, and the respondents were people who had experienced, who had been experimenting with these technologies in their supply chains, at least one of those three, or two, or maybe all three, and they would respond only about the particular technology they were currently working with.
So what causes this Gartner hype cycle to occur, to go through these technologies, to go through these different phases?
So after the results were in, my thinking is that what mid-level and senior level supply chain managers are really saying is those priorities that they are describing as saying that this is what they expect from this technology, they're really talking about the priorities for their supply chains. Meaning they really don't know what the technology will do. The priorities are really their needs of the supply chain. They want A, B, C, D, and no matter what technology you throw at them, they expect that it will solve all those issues. Obviously, and going back to that metaphor for refrigerators being used for cleaning floors may not be such a good idea. So it takes time before they realize that, okay, maybe blockchain is good for something and maybe AI is good for something else, but it's not that all technologies will solve all of their prioritized problems. So I think that's when, but only after they've gone through the disillusionment, then the true learning begins, because now they can compare technologies. They can also go to conferences or go to panel discussions like yours and share experiences. And then at some point, the knowledge starts building, say, okay, maybe AI is used for point solutions in certain cases. Blockchain is good for visibility or at least verifiable records, and maybe something else for something else. So that's why I think the hype cycle exists. You go with inflated expectations because somebody's offering you a silver bullet, and the vendor might be quite honest, but it's just, you hope. It's like going on a first date and expecting to meet Prince Charming, right?
Almost with
and then
blinders on, right?
and the blinkers fully on, and then you get the disillusionment because it has to come. You can't avoid the disillusionment because everybody thinks they're going to be at the cutting edge and they leave all their competition behind and their supply chains will work way better than anybody else's. When of course everybody falls down, we all fall down, and then after that we share experiences, lick our wounds, and then the learning curve truly begins.
So is there any way that companies can skip or at least accelerate through this sort of inflated expectations and this stage of disappointment to start that learning sooner and really get on that path?
Sure. Sure. I mean, after this research, one thing I can say for sure, and I wish when I was a consultant, our clients had done that for us. Companies know what they want, right? The supply chain managers know their supply chains more than anybody else. So they can make the list of requirements. This is what we want from supply chains, and share that with the vendor and the consultants to say what is it that you can do and what is it you cannot do. The cannot do is actually much more important than what you can do, because it helps distinguish different technologies and helps us moderate our expectations of them. So one is, develop your own list of priorities. What are your challenges or your problems, and what do you expect any technology to be able to handle? Second, share that with the vendor or consultants or both, and say what is it you can, and more importantly, what is it you cannot do with this new technology. And third, even though it sounds like being not competitive, this is not the time to be competitive. This is the time to start sharing information, if not with your direct competitors, at least with people in your supply chain or other companies in other sectors, saying this is what you're experiencing, and they'll benefit and you'll benefit. So I think those three things are quite important to be able to skip that trough. Of course, there'll be that herd effect too, where everybody will go through the inflated expectations phase, but we can keep it down, or you can tamp it down if you start sharing information faster, and also you start distinguishing between your wishes for Prince Charming versus the people who are coming saying they're Prince Charming, and asking them, okay, can you jump so high, or can you slay some dragons, or whatever it is Prince Charmings do.
Maybe take us out of Fantasyland, I think is what you're suggesting. So with that in mind, what are some of those takeaways that a company interested in starting a supply chain transformation can really think about? I think you've sort of mentioned some of them there, if they're really considering these new technologies. So one is clearly learn as much as you can from activities like this one. Maybe those customer reference calls that are often offered by a vendor like Kinaxis. Take advantage of those and learn from others and understand what worked well, and where I think the term fit for use becomes really important in this kind of conversation. Is the technology you're considering fit for use for the problem you're trying to solve?
I think it's also good to keep in mind that supply chains are very complex beasts. They spread out. So it's what you can do on a desktop computer is not necessarily what you're going to be able to roll out throughout your supply chain with many companies in that supply chain, potentially even your competitors in the supply chain. I mean, look at Apple and Samsung. Having everybody on board to make something work across the supply chain is a very different thing than making some software work on your desktop.
So I have one last question for you, and it's a little out of character from our conversation so far, but one that we're really asking everyone as they come into our big ideas in supply chain. If you, Professor Sodhi, were the Chief Supply Chain Officer of the world, what would be your top transformation priority?
Let me first say my top priority would be, how do we survive? I mean, one thing the last 2 years has taught us is that survival beats profits any day. So given how will I survive the next 2 years? How will I survive the next 10 years or 20 years? I think it's very different mindset. Obviously, you need profits to be able to survive the next 2 years and 10 years and 20 years, but it puts you in a different mindset. So transformation for me in that sense would be, given that the priority is survival and planning for survival in the coming years and decades, because that would be the best return on shareholder value one could potentially provide. Given that, my top efforts would be figuring out, how am I surviving, my company surviving, then how my supply chain is surviving, and thirdly, how I'm helping my ecosystem survive, even if my ecosystem includes my competitors. With global warming, for example, if I share warehousing or logistics with my competitors, it's okay. Coke and Pepsi, things going on the same track, maybe not on the same track, at least they can share a warehouse. So those kind of things have to be thought through. If the planet disappears, then, well, my company is not going to survive, nor will my supply chain survive. So I think survival of me, which helps me compete, survival of my supply chain, which also helps my supply chain compete with other supply chains. But having all supply chains survive, including those of others, what am I doing for that? I think that all those, my efforts in all those three directions, my survival, my supply chain survival, and my companies, and even my all the supply chain survival, I think that's where my effort would go as a chief supply chain officer for the world.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. I think our audience will find that really interesting and certainly a strong takeaway. If you'd like to learn more about Professor Sodhi and this study, please find a link to the article we discussed in the podcast details. And please join us next time as we explore more big ideas in supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.